I like your Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde
Uh-huh.
comparison. I think that really fits because there is this sort of narrative, like you say, the left wing were trying to produce. Well, this could be a summer of love. There's a place of peace and harmony and tolerance. This is the communist utopia that we've been arguing for. And the flip side of that being violence and murder and whatnot in the evening. It just seems to be this. It couldn't have been a more perfect example of why it seems that the sort of radical left-wing philosophy is fundamentally unfit for governance. If this is going to be allowed, then this is terrible. But I wanted to move on to something that happened recently that I was hoping you might be able to shed some light on. So I saw reported by the Daily Wire that Portland's Black Lives Matter activists say they're done with white Antifa and want a separation from them. Apparently, following the election and the results that suggest Joe Biden may have won, whether you agree with those results or not, it seems that there's been a rift that's formed between these two groups. Do you know anything about it?
Yeah, so in my writings and when I discuss Antifa in Portland and other major American cities, I say that BLM Antifa as sort of linked entities. And in this year in particular, they have really quite merged, I would say, at the hip. But at their core, they do have different and important ideological and political agenda differences.
Right.
BLM were founded by self-described Marxists who really loved sort of the classic communist regime model of organizing states. So they're not against the idea of nation states. They would just like it ordered under communist totalitarianism.
Could we describe them as Leninists?
Yes, I would say so. Yes.
So, right, okay. So the sort of people who want a vanguard party to take over the state, collectivize all of the property, and re-educate the populace to create the new man, the new world.
Antifa are anarchist communists, and that distinction is important in that they believe in they're Antifa anti-capitalist, but they don't believe that they think that they can order communities and societies without government.
Yeah.
So they.
If I were to characterize it as non-hierarchical, would that be accurate?
Exactly. That's what they say. That's why they reject the idea of leaders and all that. So, but there's a lot in common, obviously. Their hatred of the United States, their wanting to abolish police, hatred of capitalism, cross-pollination of critical race theory that Antifa has taken in. So they're natural allies, but ultimately these differences will lead to issues. We're seeing a little bit of it, but I don't think it'll actually lead to really any significance like breakup. But in Portland, there are these BLM activists who want more so to really radically transform the political system and bring in their candidates, for example, who introduce their radical policies and all that, whereas Antifa reject the system altogether. So they're having some of these issues, but I mean, since the election, Antifa is still rioting on a weekly basis, so it doesn't really matter if there's a few individuals who are with BLM who are voicing disagreement.
Fine doctrinaire points are kind of irrelevant when, I mean, like you said, they've got their natural allies on a lot of things. They hate the United States. They want to get rid of the police. They'll say ostensibly they're against things like racism and sexism, and et cetera, et cetera. So you can see how they ended up packaged together and moving in the same direction. Because essentially what they kind of, you could just describe them as kind of anti-Republican, couldn't you? As not necessarily right-wing conservatives, but like the concept of the American Republic is something they despise.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So, I've given testimony to Congress before, to a Senate committee, and I bring a message of that it should be welcomed really by Democrats as well, because the Antifa are working towards
They're not their friends,
dismantling
are
the
they?
U.S.
Yeah.
Yes, and that includes getting rid of the Democrats. But as you and your viewers and listeners are aware, the Democrats have been viewing them as allies against Trump, and the losers of that union will be the American people, the country, and I'm very sad to see what's the state of the U.S.
I've got to say, I find it terrifying. As an outsider watching, I expect the US to be carrying the torch, as it were, and watching the Democrats fail to understand that they have a responsibility to consider the Republicans the loyal opposition rather than as enemies. And I realize that Joe Biden has been trying to make rhetorical overtures towards the Republicans in this way, saying, well, we're fellow Americans. It's like, well, they don't think so. They seem to kind of hate fellow Americans. It concerns me. But one of the things I've noticed, and this was just this article from The Independent, if we can get this. Oh, this one's from Sky. But the way that this is the way that British media cover things happening in America. I just wanted to show you this. So this is the first one. 20 arrested as Trump supporters clashed with counter-protesters. This was the Million MAGA March. You'll notice that the language is very neutral. The clash broke out, and people were arrested, but you never get to find out who it is that's being arrested here. Am I to believe that the Trump supporters have been initiating the violence?
Initiating violence, I would say no. I generally the MO of Antifa is to specifically go and confront and fight their opposition. So, and also the Trump supporters just aren't able to mobilize in the same type of numbers to go and fight people randomly at events.
Because Antifa organizes these sort of hit squads on social media, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Would you like to tell me about it?
Yeah, so it can be really well organized and planned way ahead of time. So they were just over the weekend in the Washington state capital, Olympia. There was a stop the steal type of protest in support of Trump, and that had been promoted for weeks now. And in response to that, Antifa and other far left groups and networks organized what they said was oppose fascism type of events. So that in terms of that, they had their numbers already ahead of time to come and fight people, and there were brawls in the street. But there's also something called cyber swarming, which is where, because the networks are already established, certain accounts know who and what to retweet. If there's a particular individual that they want to target, they could just be at a pub or at a restaurant, or it could even just be a spontaneous, maybe pro-Trump gather or pro-police event that just happened that afternoon. They will get people out there right away through this system of amplifying their message very successfully, usually on Twitter. And Twitter makes no effort to break down these calls and incitements for violence by the far left.
Yeah, because I have seen posts going around where they'll say they'll name someone, they'll call them a fascist, and then give their location out, and you will see it being retweeted quite heavily by local activists, and then gangs of them will go down to harass that person. And this is Twitter being used for organization of violence.
Yes.
And nobody holds them to account.
Yeah. And almost all of these are anonymous accounts anyway, so they get shut down. If they do happen to violate and eventually get closed, you just open another one. And yeah, initially I was so surprised at seeing how accounts that had maybe 100 followers would get thousands and thousands of retweets. How they're so organized at getting their message out in a way that there's no comparison on the right. And it's we're fighting a losing battle in this regard. They've really figured out how to get their people to target their victims.
They're very motivated, aren't they? Very, very motivated. I mean, and the thing is, I really think that it might be sort of reporting. If we can go to the next one, John. This is the Independent one. So this was, again, just coverage of the rally, but it's always in the framing. I can't stand it. So they said that 20 people have been arrested. Officials have charged assault. Again, we don't find out who has been arrested. Videos posted on social media show fistfights, projectiles, and clubs as Trump supporters clashed with those demanding they take their banners and leave. Like, so the framing of this, Trump supporters clashed, sounds like the Trump supporters are the active party in there. And those other people are just standing around holding their little sign saying, please take your banner away, we're doing nothing wrong. As if this is a fair framing of the event, which I don't think it is.
So here's the thing. That criticism I agree with, and it's fair. But coming from somebody who... in the American media context, when I see things like this that are either ambiguous in how they are wording it or extremely neutral, I find that almost as refreshing, because the American left-wing media, particularly the broadcast media, I mean, look at what we have on CNN and MSNBC. And so when I compare that to things like the BBC or Sky News, I understand people, when the British public, when they talk about the left-wing bias, but I'm like, this is nothing compared to the American press.
Well, I hadn't got to where I wanted to get to in the article yet. If we can get it back up, sorry, John. The marchers included members of the Proud Boys, a neo-fascist group known for street brawling with ideological opponents at political rallies. Meanwhile, some left-wing groups led counter-demonstrations. So it's not quite as good as you might think over here. It's pretty much the same thing. I mean, I don't personally consider the Proud Boys to actually be a fascist group.
I don't either.
I see them as Republicans, frankly, which for anyone who doesn't know anything about fascism, it's the opposite of republicanism. It's total state domination, whereas republicanism is limited government. But known for street brawling with ideological opponents at political rallies is also a very fair description of Antifa.
Yes.
In fact, it seems to be their mission.
Yes.
And the description, some left-wing groups led counter-demonstrations. How soft and non-threatening is that?
This type of framing is what all of us come to expect on any type of mainstream coverage of it. And in this particular instance, it goes beyond ignorance of bias, I think, and leads to a certain amount of incitement of violence and reaction against the Proud Boys. And they're a group that has been so misunderstood. And
I think that's a generous way of putting it.
Yes.
I think smeared would be a more accurate way.
I'm trying to give my colleagues in this industry the benefit of the doubt. I think, yes, many of them are left-wing activists who are actively smearing their opponents. I've been victim to that. If you Google my name, you look at my Wikipedia, you'll see all of that. I know what that's like.
Yeah, mine looks like that too.
But there's also ignorance as well. And they just keep repeating. They see, I seen it, they just see it reported so frequently. Proud Boys are far-right extremist group or neo-fascist, that they, when these journalists, if they're in London or wherever, or in DC, New York, and they're covering something from far in another city far away, they would just repeat what they've heard. So it creates, they create their own realities through one another.